The hum of the ventilation system inside Chicago O'Hare's Terminal 3 was a familiar, monotonous lullaby to Dr. Evelyn Reed. It was the sound of transit, of moving from one place of intense focus to another. For the past 5 days, that focus had been a sterile manufacturing facility in suburban Illinois, where she'd been overseeing the final stress tests on a new generation of carbon fiber composite wing spars. Her fingers, stained with the faint grey of graphite dust she could never seem to fully wash away, tapped idly on the cover of a thick technical binder in her lap. The title was unassuming. Isotropic Material, Fatigue and Delamination Stress Vectors. To the world it was gibberish. To Evelyn it was poetry. She wore what she always wore for these trips: soft, worn black jeans, a comfortable grey hoodie with the logo of her alma mater barely visible, and sturdy boots designed for walking across concrete factory floors. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, elegant twist, a few stray curls escaping to frame a face that was tired but serene. At 42, Evelyn had long since abandoned the need to dress for anyone's approval but her own. Her work spoke for itself, a thunderous roar of competence that rendered fashion irrelevant. She was a ghost in the machine of modern aviation, the unseen expert whose calculations and insights kept hundreds of thousands of people safe at 35,000 feet every day. And today, all she wanted was to get home to her quiet New York apartment, a cup of Earl Grey tea, and the blissful silence of a completed project. Her boarding pass, displayed on the cracked screen of her phone, read, Summit Air, Flight 812, Seat 1A. She had booked it herself 2 months ago, paying the full fare out of her own pocket, as she always did. It was a small ritual of self-care after a grueling assignment. Seat 1A on this particular aircraft, an Airbus A321, was a solo pod, a cocoon of privacy with ample legroom and a small desk, perfect for spreading out her notes and finishing her final report on the flight home. Now boarding, first-class passengers for Flight 812 to LaGuardia, a voice chirped over the PA system. Evelyn stood, stretching the kinks from her back. She slung a simple, functional backpack over her shoulder and joined the short queue. The gate agent, a man with a meticulously gelled swoop of hair, scanned the boarding pass of the man in front of her, a portly executive in a shiny suit with a beaming smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Henderson." Then it was Evelyn's turn. She held out her phone. The agent's smile tightened, almost imperceptibly, as his eyes flickered from the screen to her face, to her hoodie, and back to the screen. "1A?" he asked, a note of surprise coloring his professional tone. "That's right," Evelyn said softly. He scanned the barcode. It beeped green. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, as if waiting for an error message. None appeared. "Right. Go on through," he said, his voice flat, gesturing her forward without making eye contact. Evelyn ignored the slight. She was used to it. She was an anomaly in these spaces, a quiet black woman in comfortable clothes in a world of loud men in expensive suits. She had learned long ago that arguing with a shadow was a waste of energy. Stepping onto the aircraft, she was greeted by a flight attendant standing at the door. The woman was young, probably in her mid-20s, with blonde hair pulled into a severe, perfect bun. Her name tag, pinned precisely to her navy blazer, read Tiffany. Her smile was a bright, lacquered thing that didn't reach her cold, assessing eyes. "Welcome aboard," Tiffany said, the words automatic. Her gaze swept over Evelyn, cataloguing the hoodie, the jeans, the functional backpack. The smile faltered. "Boarding pass?" she asked, her hand extended, physically blocking the entrance to the first-class aisle. Evelyn showed her the phone. Tiffany's eyebrows shot up. "1A," she stated, not as a confirmation, but as an accusation. Are you sure? Economy comfort is just past the curtain. I'm sure, Evelyn said, her voice even. My ticket says 1A. Tiffany let out a short, airy laugh, a sound like tearing silk. Of course. Well, right this way. Try not to block the aisle for our other guests. She stepped aside with a theatrical flourish, her eyes following Evelyn down the aisle, as if expecting her to trip over the plush carpeting. Evelyn found her seat, a spacious haven of beige leather and brushed aluminum. She slid her backpack under the ottoman, settled into the seat with a sigh of relief, and took a moment to just breathe. The quiet of the half-empty cabin was a balm. She pulled out her binder and a pen, ready to lose herself in the familiar comfort of stress equations and material tolerances. She was so absorbed that she barely noticed the rest of the first-class cabin filling up around her. The commotion started with a voice, a booming, self-important baritone that sliced through the calm. No, that's completely unacceptable. I explicitly told my assistant to book me in the bulkhead. I'm platinum medallion. The bulkhead is practically a given. Evelyn looked up. A man in his late 50s, with a florid face and a suit that was a size too tight, was standing in the aisle, gesticulating wildly at Tiffany with his phone. This was Gerald Vance. He was a vice president at a rival aerospace firm, a man whose reputation for bluster and mediocrity was well known in the industry. Evelyn had sat through a few of his presentations at conferences. They were always long on buzzwords and short on data. Tiffany's customer service smile was back, but it looked strained. I'm so sorry, Mr. Vance. We value your loyalty immensely. Let me just see what's going on with the seating chart. She tapped at her tablet, her brow furrowed in a pantomime of deep concern. Don't see what's going on, Vance boomed, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. Fix it. I need to work. I can't be crammed into a regular seat. My work is vital to national security. Evelyn inwardly rolled her eyes. Vance's company primarily manufactured galley carts and lavatory fixtures. Tiffany's eyes scanned her tablet and then darted nervously around the cabin. They landed on Evelyn, sitting quietly in her pod, binder open on her lap. A flicker of an idea, a malicious opportunity, crossed the flight attendant's face. Evelyn felt a familiar, cold prickle on the back of her neck. She looked down at her binder, focusing on a particularly complex equation, hoping to become invisible. It didn't work. Mr. Vance, Tiffany said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was perfectly audible. It seems the bulkhead seat, 1A, is currently occupied. Occupied? Vance's head snapped toward Evelyn's seat. He squinted, his gaze dismissive. By her? He didn't wait for an answer. He marched down the aisle, his expensive shoes thudding with indignation, and stopped directly beside Evelyn's pod. She could smell his cologne, a sharp, overpowering scent of sandalwood and entitlement. Excuse me, Vance said, not to Evelyn, but over her, to the cabin at large. I think there's been a mistake. Evelyn slowly looked up, her face a mask of neutrality. I don't believe so. You're in my seat, he declared. Evelyn held up her phone, the screen showing her boarding pass. My ticket says 1A. This is 1A. I believe your seat is 2C. Vance scoffed, a wet, unpleasant sound. He turned to Tiffany, who had hurried to his side like a loyal vizier. Tiffany, can you explain to me why this person is in my seat? And why is she dressed for a gym class? He waved a dismissive hand in Evelyn's direction. Tiffany clasped her hands, her expression shifting to one of grave authority. I am so sorry about this, Mr. Vance. There must have been a system glitch. I'll handle it. She turned to Evelyn, the fake smile gone, replaced by a hard, professional coldness. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again. I just showed it to you, Evelyn stated, her voice quiet but firm. "Show me again," Tiffany demanded, snapping her fingers. With a sigh, Evelyn held up her phone. Tiffany snatched it from her hand, her thumb swiping aggressively through the details. She frowned. The ticket was legitimate. Full fare, F-class. Paid for with a personal American Express card. There was no loophole, no employee discount, no upgrade voucher. "Well," Vance demanded, tapping his foot impatiently, "get her out of there. I have important calls to make before we take off." Tiffany looked from the valid ticket in her hand to the furious Platinum Medallion member, and then to the quiet black woman in the hoodie. In her mind, the calculation was swift and simple. Vance was the kind of customer who wrote glowing reviews when placated and career-ending complaints when angered. Evelyn was, in her eyes, a nobody, a statistical error. "It seems we have a double booking situation," Tiffany lied smoothly, handing the phone back to Evelyn without meeting her eyes. "A double booking?" Evelyn's grip on her binder tightened. "But I have an assigned seat." "Yes, but Mr. Vance is one of our most valued Platinum members," Tiffany said, her voice taking on the saccharine, condescending tone one uses to explain something simple to a child. "And on a full flight like this, we have to prioritize our loyal flyers. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your things." "What?" The word was a soft puff of disbelief. "Where am I supposed to sit?" "We've found a very nice seat for you in economy comfort," Tiffany said, with a bright, false cheer. "Row 14, it's a middle seat, but it has extra legroom." "No," Evelyn said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent cabin with the force of a gavel. The blood began to rush in her ears. "My father taught me two things. The first was fluid dynamics. The second was to never, ever give up something you have rightfully paid for. This is my seat. I am not moving." The cabin, which had been filled with the rustle of papers and quiet conversation, went utterly still. The man in 2A lowered his newspaper. Vance's mouth dropped open in a perfect O of outrage. "Excuse me," he gasped. "Did you just say no to a flight attendant?" "I said no," Evelyn repeated, her heart now hammering against her ribs. She refused to let her voice shake. "I have a ticket. I have a right to be here." Vance's face turned a blotchy, dangerous red. He whirled on Tiffany. "Are you going to let this stowaway speak to me like that? I spend over $100,000 a year with this airline. Do you know who I am?" Tiffany panicked. She couldn't lose control of the situation, not in front of a full first-class cabin. She leaned in close to Evelyn, her perfume cloying, her voice dropping to a low, menacing hiss. "Listen to me. You are creating a disturbance. You are upsetting our premium passengers. If you do not get up from this seat right now, I will have the ground crew escort you off this aircraft. You will be banned from Summit Air. Is that what you want?" Evelyn looked at Tiffany's name tag, then up into her eyes. She saw no reason, no empathy, only a desperate, petty exercise of power. "I'm not creating a disturbance," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the tremor she felt inside. "I am sitting in the seat I purchased." "Last chance," Tiffany said, straightening up and crossing her arms. "Move to 14B or get off the plane." Evelyn's eyes swept the cabin. 10 other faces, all carefully looking away, absorbed in their phones, their books, their own reflections in the dark windows. They were islands, unwilling to get involved. She felt a profound sense of isolation. She was right. She knew she was right. But she also knew that if they kicked her off the plane, she would miss her debriefing meeting in New York the next morning, a meeting that had been on the books for months. It would set the project back. "Choose your battles, Evelyn," she told herself. the old advice from her mentor echoing in her mind. But never forget who started the war. Slowly, deliberately, Evelyn closed her binder. She placed it carefully into her backpack. She zipped it up. Finally, Vance huffed. Took her long enough. A small, triumphant smirk played on Tiffany's lips. I'll just take your bag for you. There's no more overhead space in the back, so we'll have to check it. I'll keep my bag, Evelyn said quietly, standing up. She swung the backpack onto her shoulder. Vance immediately brushed past her, his shoulder bumping hers, and collapsed into the seat she had just vacated. He let out a dramatic sigh of relief, already pulling out his laptop. Wipe down the armrests, Tiffany, he commanded, without looking up. God knows what's on them. The insult landed like a physical blow. Evelyn felt the heat rise in her cheeks, a burning wave of humiliation. Tiffany simply nodded at Vance and then pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the back of the plane, past the curtain that separated the worlds. Go on, she shooed, as if speaking to a stray animal. Evelyn began the long walk. It felt like miles. Each step was a small defeat. She passed through the business-class cabin, where passengers glanced up with mild curiosity. Then she pushed through the flimsy blue curtain into the chaos of economy. The air was warmer, the aisles narrower, the noise a constant, clamoring din. She found row 14. Seat B was a sliver of space between a broad-shouldered man who was already asleep and spilling over the armrest, and a woman who was frantically trying to soothe a crying baby. The promised extra legroom was non-existent. Evelyn slid into the seat. Her knees were pressed against the hard plastic of the seat in front of her. She hugged her backpack to her chest, the hard corners of the binder digging into her ribs. She wanted to scream. She wanted to rage. But she didn't. She closed her eyes, took a deep, centering breath, and channeled her fury into cold, clear thought. She pulled out her phone. The cabin doors had just been closed. The plane was pushing back from the gate. She saw the Wi-Fi signal flicker to life. She paid the exorbitant $30 fee without a second thought. She opened her email client. Her fingers flew across the tiny screen, her movements precise and economical. The email was not addressed to the generic customer service portal. The first recipient was a direct address she knew by heart. Frank Donovan, SummitAir.Pilots. The CC list was a string of the most powerful names at the airline, from the head of operations to the CEO, all of whom she'd corresponded with professionally over the years. The subject line was stark and chilling. Urgent, operational and safety concern on Flight 812, ORD to LGA. Potential fuselage integrity issue. The body of the email was a masterpiece of controlled rage and lethal expertise. Captain Donovan. I am writing to you from seat 14B on your aircraft, though my confirmed and paid-for ticket was for seat 1A. I was forcibly removed from my assigned seat by your flight attendant, Tiffany, under the pretext of a double booking to accommodate the seating preference of another passenger, Mr. Gerald Vance. While the discriminatory nature of this incident is deeply troubling and will be addressed through official channels, it is not the primary reason for this urgent communication. The incident has created a direct and immediate safety concern. During our initial taxi from the gate, from my vantage point in seat 1A, I observed a subtle, high-frequency harmonic vibration on the port side wing, near the root joint. The pattern was consistent with the early stages of composite delamination, specifically on the new T700 series panels your fleet was recently retrofitted with. I have been auditing the manufacturing of these exact panels for the past week. The vibration was most pronounced during the turn onto the main taxiway. From my current position in row 14, I can no longer feel the specific vibration, but I now have a visual on the wing itself. There appears to be a faint but discernible stress line, approximately 10 centimeters long, running parallel to the forward spar. This is highly anomalous. It could be a simple paint flaw, or it could be an indicator of subsurface structural failure. Given the recent confidential reports of manufacturing defects at the Illinois plant, I cannot in good conscience allow this aircraft to take off without a full, on-the-ground inspection of the port wing assembly by a qualified maintenance engineer. I strongly advise you to return to the gate immediately. She signed it not with anger, but with the full weight of her authority. Dr. Evelyn Reed, Lead Auditor, FAA Aerospace Compliance, Task Force, Chief Materials Consultant, Thorne Dynamics. She hit send just as the plane came to a stop in the queue for takeoff. In the cockpit of Flight 8112, Captain Frank Donovan was running through his final pre-flight checklist with his first officer. At 58, Donovan was an old-school pilot, a man who trusted his gut, his instruments, and his crew in that order. He was gruff, by the book, and had little patience for the drama that often unfolded in the passenger cabin behind the reinforced door. His company-issued tablet, mounted next to the control column, pinged. A red banner flashed across the top. High-priority message. He grunted in annoyance, probably corporate, reminding him about fuel efficiency metrics again. He tapped the screen. The email from Dr. Evelyn Reed filled the display. He read the first paragraph about the seating dispute and let out an exasperated sigh. "Christ, another seating squabble," he muttered to his co-pilot. "Tiffany moved someone for Vance. Now we're going to get a complaint." He was about to dismiss it, to deal with it after they landed. Then he read the second paragraph. The casual cockpit chatter died. The air grew thick and cold. Words leaped off the screen, each one a separate alarm bell in his mind. Harmonic vibration, composite delamination, T700 series panels, port wing root joint. Donovan's blood ran cold. This wasn't the rambling of a disgruntled passenger. This was the precise, technical language of an expert. He knew about the T700 panels. Every pilot at Summit had attended mandatory briefings on them. He also knew, though it wasn't public knowledge, that there were whispers of issues, of corners being cut at the manufacturing plant. And then he saw the signature. Dr. Evelyn Reed. Frank Donovan felt like he'd been struck by lightning. He didn't just know the name, he revered it. Dr. Reed was a legend. She was the final word on aerospace materials. Her signature on a compliance report was worth more than $1 billion contract. She was the brilliant, elusive consultant from Thorne Dynamics, the firm that had designed the damn composites in the first place. The FAA brought her in to audit everyone, including them. And his crew had just kicked her out of the one seat on the plane from which she could spot a potential disaster, and moved her to the back like a piece of luggage. "Oh my God," the first officer whispered, reading over his shoulder. "Frank, is this real?" Donovan didn't answer. He was already grabbing his radio handset. His voice, when he spoke, was unnaturally calm, stripped of all emotion. "Tower, this is Summit 812. We are aborting our takeoff sequence. We need to hold our position and return to the gate immediately. I repeat, we are returning to the gate. Declare a pan, possible mechanical issue." Back in the first-class cabin, Tiffany was pouring a glass of champagne for a beaming Gerald Vance. "There, you see," he was saying smugly. "A little bit of firmness is all it takes to handle people like that." Suddenly, the roar of the engines spooled down. The plane, which had been inching forward, shuddered to a halt. A moment later, it began a slow, deliberate turn. The captain's voice crackled over the PA system. tight with a tension that every passenger could feel. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking. I apologize for the delay. We are returning to the gate due to a potential mechanical concern that requires an immediate ground inspection. Please remain in your seats." Vance slammed his hand on his armrest. "Unbelievable. Now we're delayed. I knew she was trouble from the moment I saw her. Probably faked some medical emergency to cause a scene." Tiffany nodded in furious agreement. "Don't worry, Mr. Vance. I'll be filing a full report on her disruptive behavior." The plane didn't just return to the gate. It was guided by ground vehicles to a remote hardstand, away from the main terminal. A set of mobile stairs was wheeled up to the main cabin door. The engine spooled down into an eerie silence. The cabin lights flickered, then stabilized. A heavy, anxious quiet descended. Then, the cockpit door opened. Captain Frank Donovan stepped out. He was a tall man, with the authoritative bearing of someone who had spent 30 years in command. But his face was a mask of grim fury. He didn't even glance at Tiffany or Vance. His eyes scanned the cabin, and then he began to walk, his stride long and purposeful, straight toward the curtain to economy. He pushed through it without ceremony and marched down the narrow aisle, ignoring the confused stares of the passengers. He counted the rows under his breath. 12, 13, 14. He stopped. He looked down at the woman crammed into the middle seat, her head bent over a technical binder. "Dr. Reed?" he asked. His voice was filled with a deference that bordered on awe. Evelyn looked up. Her expression was calm, her eyes clear. "Captain Donovan." "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to come with me, right now, to the cockpit." He extended a hand to help her out of the seat. "And on behalf of my entire airline, please accept my most profound and sincere apologies for the absolutely unacceptable conduct of my crew." He personally escorted her from the cramped confines of row 14 back toward the front of the plane. The entire aircraft watched in stunned, mystified silence as the captain, looking like a solemn pallbearer, led the woman in the hoodie through the curtain and back into the rarefied air of first class. As they entered the forward cabin, Gerald Vance, unable to contain his indignation, stood up. "Captain, what is the meaning of this? This entire delay? It's because of her, isn't it? I insist you file a report." Donovan stopped. He turned to face Vance, and for the first time, Evelyn saw the full, unrestrained fury in the pilot's eyes. It was the cold, professional rage of a man who had just stared into the abyss of a potential catastrophe. "Mr. Vance," Donovan said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This delay is happening because that woman, Dr. Evelyn Reed, the world's foremost expert on the materials holding this aircraft together, just sent me an email from the middle seat my crew banished her to, informing me of a potential structural failure that could have sent all 187 of us into the ground. This delay is happening because she may have just saved your life." He took a step closer. "So I am going to ask you, just once, to sit down, shut your mouth, and stay out of my way while I do my job." Vance's ruddy face went completely white. He collapsed back into his seat as if his bones had turned to jelly. Tiffany, who had been standing near the galley, looked as though she had seen a ghost. The name, the technical jargon, the captain's terrifying deference. The pieces were no longer just clicking into place. They were assembling themselves into the shape of a guillotine poised directly over her career. Her perfect composure shattered, and her face crumpled in dawning horror. Donovan LeDonovan led Evelyn past them into the sanctum of the cockpit. The heavy door clicked shut, muffling the anxious murmur of the cabin into a distant, irrelevant hum. The space was a cocoon of focused calm, filled with the soft glow of dozens of screens and the low, electronic thrum of dormant systems. The first officer, a young man whose face was pale with adrenaline, offered her his seat without a word. She declined with a small shake of her head, preferring to stand, to command the space from a different axis. "Show me," Donovan said again, his voice raw. For the next 20 minutes, the world outside that door ceased to exist. There was no Tiffany, no Vance, no insult, no humiliation. There was only the problem. Evelyn was no longer a passenger. She was the oracle. Her finger, steady and sure, traced a path on the high-definition feed from the wing camera. "There," she said, her voice a low, precise instrument. That slight moire pattern in the reflection, right at the wing body fairing. It's almost imperceptible. Most people would dismiss it as a trick of the light, a smudge on the lens. Donovan and his first officer leaned in, their faces inches from the screen. They saw nothing but the sleek, grey curve of the wing against the concrete tarmac. "Now," Evelyn continued, "couple that visual with the specific 8.2 Hz harmonic I felt through the floor plate in 1A. It's a low-amplitude, high-frequency vibration. You wouldn't feel it past row 5. It would be dampened by the fuselage structure. It's a signature. It's the sound of individual carbon fibers beginning to snap under sheer stress, deep inside the laminate." She spoke their language, the secret dialect of forces and tolerances, of physics and failure. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet certainty of her words carried more weight than any shouted command. She and the pilots moved from the camera feed to schematics she sketched on a blank page in her binder, discussing resin compositions, autoclave curing temperatures, and the known brittle failure modes of the T700 series. It was a fluid, professional exchange, a meeting of minds focused on a single, terrifying possibility. Donovan, his face grim, got the head of Summit Air's maintenance division, a man named Sal, on the satellite phone. "Sal, it's Frank on 8 or 12. We're back at the hard stand. I've got someone here who needs to talk to you." He handed the phone to Evelyn. "This is Dr. Reed," she said, and a stunned silence met her from the other end. She didn't wait for him to process it. "Sal, I need you to pull the manufacturing logs for batch 77B4 from the Illinois plant, specifically the thermocouple data from the June 14th curing cycle. I suspect you'll find a temperature droop in quadrant 3 of the autoclave, leading to incomplete resin polymerization." She rattled off part numbers, stress coefficients, and ultrasonic testing protocols from memory. On the other end of the line, the maintenance chief, a man who had heard every excuse and panicked pilot theory imaginable over 30 years, was utterly silent. He was listening to the architect of the cathedral describe a single flawed brick from 1,000 miles away. "Ground the plane," Sal said finally, his voice strained, stripped of its usual gruff confidence. "Ground the whole goddamn plane. I'm sending my A-team out there right now with a phased array UT scanner. Nobody breathes on that wing until I get a full C-scan of that spar." Donovan took the phone back. He looked at Evelyn, his expression a complex mixture of profound gratitude and deep, corrosive professional shame. "Dr. Reed, I don't know what to say." "You did the right thing, Captain," Evelyn said, her voice softening for the first time. "You listened. In the end, that's the only system that works." He nodded, the simple gesture carrying the weight of a near catastrophe. He took a deep, steadying breath. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a crew to manage and a plane to deboard." He stepped back into the cabin. The atmosphere was a fragile membrane of tension, ready to tear. He stood at the threshold between first class and the cockpit, his back straight, his authority absolute. "Ladies and gentlemen, an update." His voice boomed through the PA, devoid of its earlier clipped tension, now resonant with cold command. "This flight is cancelled. A potential structural issue has been identified that requires an immediate and extensive inspection. Your safety is our only priority. Ground staff is arranging for a replacement aircraft, but I must be clear, it will be a significant delay. We will begin deplaning by the aft door in 5 minutes." A wave of groans and frustrated sighs swept through the aircraft. His gaze, however, was fixed. It swept past the stunned faces of the other passengers and landed on Tiffany Harrington. His voice dropped, losing the amplification of the PA system, yet it seemed to cut through the cabin noise like a shard of ice. "Flight Attendant Harrington," he said, his tone flat and devoid of any emotion. "Please collect your personal items. You will meet the station manager on the jet bridge. You are relieved of duty, effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Your credentials will be collected by security." He didn't list her crimes aloud. He didn't need to. The public nature of the dismissal was surgical, brutal, and utterly final. It wasn't a reprimand, it was an excision. Tiffany stood frozen, her face a marble mask of disbelief. The lacquered smile, her primary tool and weapon, had dissolved, leaving behind a slack-jawed terror. The carefully constructed world of rules and status she had wielded so carelessly had just turned on her with lethal force. Donovan's glacial stare then moved, settling on Gerald Vance, who was attempting to become one with the buttery leather of seat 1A. "Mr. Vance," the captain said, his voice a low growl, "our corporate security and relations teams will be in contact with you and your employer regarding your conduct on this flight. I suggest you cooperate fully." He turned away, the dismissal as absolute as a judge leaving the bench. The sentence had been passed. The details were a matter for the executioners. Vance looked as if he'd been struck by a physical blow. The florid, entitled rage had vanished, replaced by the pasty, sickened grey of a man who had just watched his entire life of privilege and bluster curdle before his eyes. The deplaning process was somber, almost funereal. As Evelyn collected her backpack, the man from 2A, the one who had hidden behind his newspaper, leaned into the aisle. His face was etched with shame. "Ma'am," he whispered, his voice cracking, I saw the whole thing. I should have said something. I'm sorry. What you did. It was—" He couldn't find the word. Evelyn met his gaze. She saw in his eyes the quiet, corrosive guilt of the bystander. "The time to say something is when it's happening," she said, not with anger, but with the simple, weary clarity of a teacher stating a fundamental truth. She gave a small, sharp nod, accepting not the apology, but the lesson she hoped he had learned. She was the last passenger to leave. Captain Donovan and a stern-faced station manager were waiting for her at the door. "Dr. Reed," Donovan said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his palm calloused. "I've been flying for 32 years. I've declared emergencies. I've landed in zero visibility. But I have never been prouder to cancel a flight. You didn't just save an aircraft today. You saved 187 souls, mine included." "You saved us, Captain," Evelyn replied, shaking his hand. "You made the right call when it mattered. That's the job." As she stepped onto the jet bridge, she glanced back one last time. She saw Tiffany, no longer a figure of authority, but a diminished shape, being spoken to in low, severe tones by 2 airline managers. She saw Gerald Vance, fumbling with his ridiculously expensive carry-on, his movements clumsy, his face a ruin of public humiliation. She felt no flicker of triumph, no satisfaction of revenge. There was only a profound, hollow ache. A deep, weary sadness for a world where dignity was a commodity to be allocated, and respect had to be earned with a cataclysm. It never had to be this way. Hours later, in a sterile, windowless operations center, deep in the bowels of O'Hare, the air was cold and smelled of ozone and stale coffee. Evelyn stood beside Captain Donovan and the airline's chief of operations, a man named Kenji Tanaka, who had the exhausted, haunted look of someone who had just been pulled from a wreckage. They stared at a massive, high-resolution monitor, displaying a live feed from a maintenance technician's borescope camera out on the darkened tarmac. "Okay. I'm at the coordinates she gave." The technician's voice crackled, tinny and distant. "Exterior is clean. I'm going in through the inspection panel, feeding the scope along the spar cap. Hold on." The image on the screen was a dizzying journey through the hidden guts of the wing. Then it stabilized. "There," the technician breathed. "You see that? Right there." Kenji Tanaka leaned forward, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the console. On the screen, magnified 100 times, was the truth. It wasn't a single crack. It was a terrifying, spidery network of delamination, a milky white cancer spreading through the black carbon fiber. The layers of the composite were peeling apart from the inside, an invisible wound that was moments from catastrophic failure. Under the immense stress of takeoff rotation and cabin pressurization, the wing would not have bent. It would have shattered. A collective, shuddering breath was released in the room. Kenji Tanaka slowly straightened up, taking off his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. He turned to Evelyn, his eyes filled with a raw, unvarnished awe. "The board has been briefed, Doctor," he said, his voice hoarse. "They've grounded all 7 A321s fitted with panels from that manufacturing batch, effective immediately. You didn't just save Flight 812. You likely prevented multiple staggered disasters across our global fleet." He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of profound, almost reverential respect. "We are in your debt, in a way we can never repay." Evelyn spent the night in a hotel suite the airline had insisted upon, a cavernous, impersonal space with sweeping views of the city lights. She didn't sleep. She sat by the window, the technical binder in her lap, and watched the endless river of headlights on the freeway below. Her phone, which she'd finally turned back on, was a constant vibration of alerts. The story, despite Summit Air's best efforts at containment, had broken. Not as a viral passenger video, but as something far more serious. FAA auditor, halts airliner takeoff, cites critical flaw after being unseated. The narrative was potent, irresistible. The quiet black woman in the hoodie, the hidden genius, the Cassandra whose warning was ignored until it became terrifyingly real. Her name was everywhere. She was no longer a ghost in the machine. She was the machine's conscience, laid bare for the world to see. It was a strange and deeply uncomfortable feeling. Her work was her sanctuary, a place of pure logic and data. To have it tangled up with the messy, ugly business of prejudice and public perception felt like a violation. They were focusing on the drama, on the humiliation she had endured. But for her, the true story was in the silent, deadly spiderweb of cracks inside a composite spar. The human failure was merely the trigger for revealing the mechanical one. The official fallout was swift and merciless. Tiffany Harrington's union hearing was a formality. Faced with the captain's damning testimony and the NTSB's preliminary report, which used phrases like imminent catastrophic failure, her defense evaporated. Her career in aviation was over. The last Evelyn heard, through a clipped industry report, was that she had been terminated for gross negligence and willful endangerment of an aircraft. Gerald Vance's company, eager to distance itself from the toxic publicity, fired him via a terse press release, citing a complete failure to uphold our corporate values. His name became a short-lived verb in business circles for arrogant self-destruction. He vanished from the aerospace world, his bluster finally silenced. 2 weeks later, Evelyn was back in her New York office, a quiet, sunlit space overlooking the East River. A thick courier envelope had arrived that morning. Inside was a formal letter of commendation from the FAA, praising her extraordinary vigilance and unparalleled expertise. Beneath it was a personal, handwritten letter from the CEO of Summit Air, a man named Marcus Davies. He offered a heartfelt apology and 2 things: a lifetime, unlimited pass for first-class travel on their airline and its global partners, and a multi-million-dollar consulting contract to personally oversee a root and branch overhaul of their materials sourcing and fleet inspection protocols. She read the letter twice, then picked up the phone and dialed the direct number he'd provided. Marcus Davies. Mr. Davies, this is Evelyn Reed. The voice on the other end warmed instantly. Dr. Reed, thank you for calling. I hope you received my letter. Please tell me you'll accept our offer. It's the least we can do. I will accept the consulting contract, she said, her voice calm and measured. My team can be in Chicago by Monday to begin the assessment. We will fix your system. She paused, letting the words settle. However, I must respectfully decline the offer of complimentary travel. There was a moment of stunned silence. May I ask why, Doctor? It's an unconditional offer. No restrictions. Evelyn swiveled in her chair to look out the window. She watched a plane, a tiny silver cross, making its final approach to LaGuardia, descending gracefully through the vast blue canvas of the sky. Because, Mr. Davies, she said, her voice soft but unyielding, my father taught me to pay my own way. Not out of pride, but out of principle. A ticket is a contract. It guarantees a safe passage from one place to another. It should also guarantee a baseline of dignity. That dignity shouldn't be a reward for being a hero. It shouldn't be a perk for a special status. It should be the absolute, unbreakable standard for every single person who buys a ticket. She took a breath. I don't want a lifetime pass. I want to help you build an airline when no one would ever need one. A month later, she was at JFK, heading to a conference in London. She wore her usual soft jeans and a comfortable dark blue sweater. Her simple backpack was slung over one shoulder, the familiar weight of her technical binder a comforting presence. She walked to the Summit Air gate and handed her phone to the agent. The woman scanned the barcode. Her eyes widened slightly as the name registered. A genuine, unforced smile bloomed on her face. It was not a smile of fear or forced deference, but one of pure, unadulterated respect. Welcome, Dr. Reed, she said, her voice warm. Seat 1A. We are honored to have you with us today. Please board at your leisure. Have a wonderful flight. Evelyn stepped onto the plane. She found her cocoon, her haven of beige leather and brushed aluminum. She stowed her bag, sat down, and pulled out her notes, the familiar equations a quiet comfort. She was, once again, just another passenger. But something had shifted, not just for her, but in the air around her. The flight attendants greeted her with a quiet professionalism that was laced with something deeper, an awareness. As the plane pushed back from the gate, the powerful engine spooling up with a familiar, reassuring roar. She leaned her head back against the seat. Her worth had never been determined by her seat number, by the clothes she wore, or by the assumptions of others. Her worth was in the math. It was in the integrity of the carbon fiber the strength of the spar, the elegant, brutal truth of physics. The world was just finally, slowly, learning how to read the manifest. And as the aircraft lifted gracefully into the sky, a small, quiet smile touched Evelyn Reed's lips. It was not a smile of triumph, but of equilibrium. The scales for a time were balanced.